G'day guys, back with the Circle. This is my third attempt now at trying to record this video. It's an idea I came up with on the weekend during the live stream, but I had to mull the idea over in my head for a few days before I tried to actually verbalize it. And in the end, I'm just going to speak off the cuff. The more I think about it, the more I'm starting to understand the predicament that the Imperial Guard as a faction are in. And yes, they are the Imperial Guard. The Astra Militarum is a name that's 3 years old and entirely exists for copyright reasons. It's stupid and I refuse to call them that. The Imperial Guard of Warhammer 40,000 are a good faction. They're a fun faction. They're a faction I myself have played over the years. And there's so many different unique flavours to them. Mordian Iron Guard, Praetorians, you've got the Steel Legion, Death Corps of Krieg, Catachan, Vostroyan. There are so many different cool factions and sub-factions within the Imperial Guard you can pick from. But of course, the first thing people always see when they look at the faction is the Cadians. And the Cadians as a faction are, well, they're kind of plain, they're kind of boring. They look very similar to modern-day Western militaries around the world, with a few slightly sci-fi elements about them. The obvious rigid body armor they wear, very similar to the colonial marines in the movie Aliens. Also, the fact that they're packing las guns, but the las guns really don't look too dissimilar at a distance to, say, something like an M16. Now, yeah, okay, they do look different if you understand that, but if you're some layman looking at guns, well, guns are guns. Anyway, I see a few problems with the Imperial Guard as a faction, and this is not to take a crap on them or the people that like them, because like I just said, I like them. Even right now, I'm currently collecting Solar Auxilia, who are a type of Imperial Army / Imperial Guard force. Just a very elite force like Kazakhstan or Stormtroopers, or the Tempestus Scions. Now, when I look at the faction, the more I look at them, the more problems I'm seeing. And the problems I'm seeing stem from a few facts. The first one is, well, yeah, they look like a Western military of today. And if you're a person who's entering Warhammer 40,000, that's not very interesting. Now, again, just to reiterate the point, if you are into that, if you like the faction, that is perfectly good and perfectly fine. But think about this from the perspective of someone new to the hobby. Maybe they're more interested in the actual sci-fi elements of the game. Something like Space Marines is a much easier and cooler sell to a new player, because they're saying, hey, look, this is an elite special forces unit of superhumans, genetically modified and enhanced, in this awesome full suits of armor with insanely powerful weaponry. And immediately people are like, oh wow, cool, you know what, that pretty much what I said is the Games Workshop sale pitch. And then you get down to it and it's like, okay, if I buy a starting force for one of these Imperial Guard armies, say the Cadian Defense Force here, that Cadian Defense Force is, 20 multi-part infantry, multi-part command squad, a multi-part heavy weapons team, as well as a Leman Russ and a Chimera. And really, that's not a viable army either. It's not the toys that a lot of people will take in their Imperial Guard armies. Whereas if I were to look at some of the other starting sets available to other factions, well, the Tau Empire one, yeah, it's pretty good. The Gene Stealer Cults one, that's pretty good. Both of them, in fact. The one that comes with the Codex and without. The Start Collecting Demons of Slanesh, Khorne, Orcs, all these factions and their starting sets are pretty good. Every one of them is viable to some extent and provides a lot of the cool toys. I mean, this Getting Started Space Marines one is excellent value for what you're getting. And then you look at the Cadians, and it's like, okay, that's very daunting, because if you want to build and paint a Space Marine, hello, it's Ultramarine Blue. You can buy a rattle can now, or even just a white rattle can or a black rattle can, hit them with that, and then give them a big thick coat of contrast paint that glugs up all the details. But hey, you've now got a blue squad of Space Marines on your hands. You don't have to be the world's most talented painter. On the other hand, approaching a Cadian Defense Force faction and trying to paint a whole bunch of these Cadian squads and do all the little khaki colours and the skin colours, and skin is a very daunting thing for people who are new to the hobby. getting flesh to look right, a lot of new people dread it and will often pick helmeted models for the deliberate reason that they don't have to paint the bare skin. So straight away, daunting prospect having to paint a command squad, but then they've got to build it all. So a start collecting box for many people is great because, all these Space Marine kits, they're often mono-pose, especially the Primaris stuff. Everything just clips together. Sometimes you don't even need glue. The Cadians, they're the polar opposite of that. You have to glue on each arm, each weapon. You've got to glue on backpacks if required, or helmets, or frag grenades, just little bits and bobs. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. Okay, that's fine once you're used to the hobby. Once you've had a few kits up your sleeve, that kind of thing, yeah, it's nice to have multi-part kits and be able to convert and customize your models. And in fact, when it comes to HQ units, I argue that that should be the default. They should always be multi-build kits or multi-pose kits. But for your basic troops, it's not really needed. And when you get to the Cadians, you've got all these multi-part troops, and a person has to sit there and glue all these different parts together. So straight away, they're harder models to paint, they're harder models to build. And also, when it comes to building your army, for the same amount of money, you will get a very similar amount of models for another army. But the problem is, the models in the other army are going to stretch a lot further. Again, I'll use Space Marines as the point. If I buy 2 of this Start Collecting Space Marines box, with the older style of Space Marines in it, our beloved original Space Marines, not the Primar junk. If I got this box, okay, I'd have a bit of work ahead of me building those multi-part Marines, very similar to the multi-part Guardsmen. They're going to be much easier to paint at the end of the day, though. And of course, I'll have my Dreadnought. And if I buy 2 of that box, I'm going to have 2 good Dreadnoughts, 2 good tactical squads with a few varieties of weapons. For the $10 less, I can get the Cadian Defense Force, which only has essentially 2 Dreadnoughts, cancels out the 2 tanks, the 2 tactical squads cancels out the 2 Cadian infantry squads, and the 2 Space Marine commanders gets rid of a couple of models in the command squad. So really all this has a couple of models in the command squad and the heavy weapons team in excess points. And as we all know, basic Cadians are worth a lot less than Space Marines points-wise and ability-wise on the tabletop. It's just not a viable force. So for people to buy into the faction, they've got to spend a lot more money in the initial setup stage. So then it's like, okay, what are the buffs of this faction? Well, it's a Horde army. But when it comes to Horde armies, there's so many other ones out there that offer such interesting playstyles. You've got Tyranids, is a big one. Also, you've got the Orcs, another great Horde army. And then you've got the weird one, which is Genestealer cults, which is hordes, but it can have some elite units in it. But the beauty of the Genestealer cults is you're taking a lot of these existing kits, like Cadian Defense Force troops, and they're putting new helmets on them, and a couple of new weapons, and some upgrades, and it's making something more visually interesting out of that force, as well as having a few extra toys to play with that aren't available to the Cadians. On top of this, okay, maybe you could go tank heavy. Look how many different tanks and walkers and stuff you have available to. All these different Lehman Russ variants, Chimera variants, Vendettas, Valkyries. But then all of those tanks and playing tank heavy forces, you can do with other lists. You can do that with Chaos, you can do that with Space Marines. You can do variants of it even with, say, the Eldar. The Eldar have a lot of vehicles, grav vehicles to pick from if that's the way you're inclined to go. So there's no real niche anymore. The Guard aren't just the Horde army with guns. There's other armies out there like that. They're not the army with all the big powerful tanks, because again, there are a lot of other factions out there that can do it as well now. That's not to say that there aren't niche vehicles the Guard have that aren't better at what they do than other factions, but they're in a horrible place where the faction has less appeal to the new hobbyist because I don't want to play Americans in space, a lot of people will say. Because that's probably the first thing they're going to think of when they look at this, like, oh, is that like some kind of future American faction? Because these people aren't 40k players, they're people entering the hobby, I'm assuming. People who are in the hobby are probably looking at it going, that's a lot of work, that's a lot of money, I don't know the investment's worth it. And you know they're probably not going to get new units like replacements for the Cadian shock troops. Yeah, the shock troops came out back in 2004. But you've also got to remember, armies like the Genestealer cult have current kits which use them as a base miniature. And I don't think they would remove those Genestealer cult kits from production. And at the same time, I don't think they would go to the expense of buying a new mold and making all new Cadian shock troops with new sculpts, and going to all that expense of a new mold, and then also having to keep a mold in production just to do the Genestealer cults. So I see a problem there. And then you've got things like the Tempestus Scions squad and the Command squad, which are very expensive for what you get. I mean, $50 for 5 guys. They're more expensive than Space Marines. And again, less effective on the tabletop than a stock Primaris Space Marine. So the person buying in is just not seeing the reward for their money. And then on top of that, they're probably looking at the community and seeing a lot of people saying, hey, these molds are all 20 years old, what the hell, Games Workshop? Oh, these rules suck, or this sucks. That's a problem. What's another niche that maybe Guard fulfill? Oh, well, they're a shooting army. They've got a lot of long-range firepower, snipers in the form of ratlings or sniper squads. They have all their tanks, of course, all these super heavies. I mean, they kind of have the super heavy market cornered until you look at Forge World. But, of course, it's a game where Imperial Knights exist. But there's so many other factions, like especially Tau. Tau play up to that. And what's cooler, Sentinel or a Broadside Battlesuit or a Riptide? It's, it's hard to juggle. So there's a lot of problems I'm seeing here. I don't think the Guard just have the appeal. Those people who are like me, who are old players, who've been in the game for a long time and remember those days in something like 3rd edition, when someone bringing a Leman Russ to the battlefield was a terrifying experience because you knew you were about to get guess range pie-plated. Because yes, they were guess range back then. And cover wasn't anywhere near as ubiquitous in 2nd and 3rd edition, so Leman Russes really, really hurt you. Right now, they're not really bringing anything that other factions don't. There are other armies that play hordes better. There are armies that shoot better. There are other armies that do tanks equally well, if not better. What are the Guard bringing these days? And it's not to say you can't make great lists, you can't make viable lists, that the faction doesn't have good and interesting background stories. All of this is true. But if people aren't seeing it and people aren't buying into the faction, the company's never going to support it. And I think that's the horrible state that the Imperial Guard are in right now. Here you have a faction which has no clear direction. They're not getting much love in the current stories. They're not getting cool new kits or a consistent looking theme across the army. Because if I put the Tempestus Scions command squad here, side by side with the Cadian command squad there, which of those particular units would you say is the natural leader of the army? Probably the guys on the right. And it's like, okay, but are these two in the same force? Is this the same army? On the left, you've got guys wearing khaki robes and green armor, and on the right, you've got these guys in this blue armor with red berets, and the armor has chaos-style gold trim all over it for some fucking reason. It couldn't just be flat, plain armor. I mean, personally, I think the Kazakhstan are the best-looking stormtroopers they ever did. You're basically in a horrible place. People aren't going to buy into the Guard anywhere near enough for Games Workshop to justify doing anything interesting with them. The faction needs a ground-up rebuild, basically. They need to find some way to have a consistent visual theme throughout the army, or offer probably a range of upgrade kits, which can be applied to a basic model, very much like, say, Victorian miniatures would do. Head swaps, weapon swaps, backpacks are a great one to do, right? Provide a basic frame of an infantryman, a basic soldier holding his lasgun, and then give people a way of upgrading him to represent the different factions of the Imperial Guard. The same way they provide upgrade kits to the Space Marine chapters. If they did that, they could start to sort of homogenize them and give the army a less eclectic feel, because again, if you look at Scions and Cadian Command Squad, and then you look at Ratlings, and then you're looking at Catachans and Ogrins and Crusaders and whatever else is lying around, weird vein psychers and commissars, and people are trying to realize that all these things fit into the same faction. At least when you look at Space Marines, they're all in the same armor. They're all blue. They're all Ultramarines. They're all in power armor of some kind. And you can tell that even Reavers and Aggressors are from the same faction. They have a homogenous feel. But you don't get that with the other Guard factions. People probably don't even realize that the Catachans and the Cadians are two different styles of the exact same faction when they look at them. Because again, not everyone coming into this is an experienced hobbyist. And for those that are, again, transferring from something like Chaos Space Marines or from regular Space Marines to a Guard force, that's a huge step. You know you're spending a lot of money on it. You're not going to get much payback for your investment. That's not to say that, you won't have some great gains with it and such, but you're going to be buying a lot more models to make the same amount of points and have the same impact on a game. And it doesn't help when your basic infantrymen, as in the case of Guard, feel absolutely worthless on the battlefield, which is what the current rules lead me to believe they really are. When you compare them to what are the basic infantry of other armies. So, yeah, Guard are in a horrible place right now, and if they don't do something like diversify the faction by making upgrade kits to a standard type of torso and legs, so that people can viably build a whole bunch of different factions, they do something like that, I feel like the Guard aren't long for this world, that they're really just being strung along edition after edition without really receiving the love that they need, because they just don't fit in. There's nothing special they're doing, and I don't know how popular they are anymore. The only thing they've really got going for them, I think, is their tanks. Building Guard tank armies, which are full of these awesome looking tanks and super heavies, that's a cool thing. If you can even get some, they always seem to be out of stock thanks to a certain virus. That's pretty much the only thing I see people doing with the Guard. I don't see people playing huge Steel Legion armies. I mean, I had a Steel Legion army for a while there. I had about 30 of the foot troops alone. But you don't see that. You don't see people building new armies of Catachan jungle fighters, which, fun fact, I believe it was 1998 they came out. The Command Squad, though, was much later. That was a 2004 release, FYI. Yeah, there's no homogenous feeling to the faction. You don't see people building new armies of Guard. It's just not a high draw item. The tanks, again, seems to be the only thing people are really interested in. So, yeah, what are they offering as a faction right now? I don't see good things ahead in the Guard's future, and I don't mean to be too pessimistic. It's just, look at it from the pragmatic point of view. It's an expensive faction with models that aren't very good on the tabletop, with some really good niche units that can buff them out, and people want to use those units, but maybe the game is not always conducive to doing so. There's a lot of problems there. Anyway, I'm curious to hear what people's thoughts are on this. Maybe I've gone off on a completely crazy tangent because, again, all off the cuff. Sorry about that. But what do you think? Do you think Guard are in a good place? Do you think that... No, it's very easy to understand just looking at these models, that they're all part of the same faction and how they glue together as a force. I don't think they are, but I could be wrong. So I'd love to hear from Guard players out there. And also people I really want to hear from are the people who wanted to play the Imperial Guard, but didn't, and why they didn't. And if it syncs up with what I think the answer is, which is it's just too daunting, too hard to paint, too hard to build, too much money to spend, or some combination of all three. Anyway, make with the outer circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.